Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is capandball here, your favorite gun channel in beautiful bright Hunglish language, and this is the third and final part of the series about the French 1786 Light Cavalry Musketoon. Please don't forget to check the first two parts. The first one is dealing with the cartridges of these carbines and also the 1777 musket family. The second part is dealing with how these guns were manufactured with using the new method of manufacturing and what was the failure in it. And the third part will be focusing on the history of this particular gun and on the performance of this particular gun. If you find value in what I do, then please support me on patreon.com/capandball. Here you will find exclusive content from me. We are also present on the History of Weapons and War platform that is a beautiful ad-free home for all the gun nuts like us with thousands of videos from educational channels. Ladies and gentlemen, please like, share, comment, subscribe, help us grow. Thank you very much. The setup of the manufacturing of the new 1777 Firearms family was done in steps. The first one was the infantry musket in 1777, and the next year in 1778 it was followed by the cavalry pistol, by the long cavalry carbine, and also the dragoon musket. In 1779, the makers received the instructions for making the cadet muskets, and in 1781 they received the instructions for the carbines with the rifled bores. And the last one in the row, it was the 1786 model Light Cavalry Musketoon. The complete project was aiming for interchangeability, but there are of course significant changes between the different type of arms in length, stock type and stuff like that. But importantly, there are differences in the caliber also, because the cavalry arms, they had a smaller caliber than the infantry arms. The caliber of the infantry arms was a 17.5 millimeter. Up until 1792 it was loaded with a ball of 16.5 millimeter in diameter, but it was later reduced to 15.9 millimeter to easier loading, for easier loading. And the cavalry arms, they had a 17.1 millimeter bore, so it was 0.4 millimeter less than the infantry arms, because they needed a tighter fit at the breech. It was not for better accuracy, but for a tighter fit in the breech, because often the cavalry arms were carried with muzzle down, which means that this kind of tighter fit was necessary to keep the cartridge in place. Among all the long arms of the family, the Light Cavalry Musketoon is the shortest one. It has a total length of 106.5 centimeter, and the length of the bore is 70.4 centimeters only. And of course the bore is smooth, it's not rifled. The model 1786 Light Cavalry Musketoon is a close descendant of the model 1767 Light Cavalry Musketoon or Hussar Musketoon. The main difference between the two arms is technically the lock itself, because of course it is the new model lock, which means that it has a tilted brass pen, while the original, the 1767 model, had an iron pen that was in line with the bore axis. That's the biggest difference. These short beauties were intended for two kinds of soldiers, the hussars and the chasseurs, the mounted chasseurs, the mounted riflemen. But in fact in the French army, these mounted riflemen did not carry rifles, they carried these light musketoons. These two types of soldiers needed a much shorter and much lighter musketoon than the normal cavalry musketoon, and also lighter one than the dragoon musket. The first production batch of these guns started in 1786, and they were manufactured in Charleville, Maubeuge and Saint-Étienne. But let's get back to the French Hussars for a sec, because we have a very strong Hungarian relation here. The first French Hussar regiment was established in 1720 by a guy called László Ignác Bercsényi. He is Hungarian. László Ignác Bercsényi fought with his father, László Bercsényi, on the side of Rákóczi Ferenc or Ferenc Rákóczi II in the rebellion against the Habsburg in the beginning of the 18th century. When this rebellion fell, in 1711 he emigrated. Bercsényi started to serve in the French army, which is obvious because they had a very strong relationship with France, because France was actually donating money for the Hungarians to equip the army against the Habsburg. This was considered the second front in the beginning of the 18th century in the conflict of the Habsburg and the French. Now, in 1720 he suggested the king to set up a regiment, a Hussar regiment from Hungarian emigrants, and in fact this is what he did. And this became the Bercsényi Hussar regiment that was later designated as the first Hussar regiment of the French army. And this regiment is still standing, and this is the longest serving unit of the French army today. By that time Hussars were considered one of the best cavalrymen available. And they were a great asset for the French army, because they brought that kind of art of war that was developed for centuries fighting against the Ottomans. This was not a Hungarian invention, not a sole Hungarian invention. The Poles, the Croats, the Serbs and the Hungarians, altogether the Eastern European nations, they developed that kind of light cavalry tactics that was so useful in the Western theatre of war as well. Bercsényi and the other Hungarian migrants not only brought the art of military of the light cavalry, but they also brought the look, which means that the hussar uniform of the Hungarian soldier became a fashion in Western Europe also. If you check these beautiful uniforms in the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, well, these hussar uniforms are very close relatives to the Hungarian traditional hussar uniform, and we are very proud of that.
The most important parts of the colorful uniform were the dolmány or jacket decorated with heavy horizontal braid, the mente, the short-waisted overjacket worn on single shoulder, the tight Hungarian trousers, and the tarsoly or bag. In the Imperial Royal Army, all the 12 hussar regiments were recruited from Hungary, and all had a distinctive color uniform. Let's check the rate of fire of this little musketoon with a relaxing mid-minute relay. The distance is 25 meters.
And these are nice little holes, ladies and gentlemen. 1, 2, 3 here. And it's quite in a good group, let's say. It's within the 9-wing size group, which is quite good. This is only 25 meter or let's say 30 paces, which is probably the best tactical distance for a carbine like this. I was shooting from a comfortable position, not on horseback, of course, which means that if you're shooting from horseback, it will reduce, of course, the accuracy. But this is not that bad. And this is the original service load, ladies and gentlemen. It is the equivalent of the original 7.5 grams of black powder and the 15.9 millimeter round ball, the 24 gram 9 round ball of this arms. The rate of fire is the same as with any kind of musket, at least from my hand, because I'm not a practice soldier, but I'm a target shooter, so I always lose time when I'm trying to aim. So don't aim, just shoot. And of course I lost some time when I was trying to return the ramrod at the third shot, before the third shot. And the problem was because the first band moved a bit, so I lost some seconds there, but anyway it was quite good. It was quite good. Nice little arm, and it has a hefty recoil. But let's get back to the Hussar Musketoon now. So the first production period started in 1786 and lasted until 1792, and this was the period when the interchangeability was forced, so they tried to make the guns with interchangeable parts. Now this carbine is not from that period. This is called the first model, because this was manufactured already at the time of the revolution, in the second or the third year, which means 1793 or 1794, and it was made in Paris. This was the time when the new government was struggling for arming their troops. At this time the French government was in desperate need of firearms for 3 strong reasons. First, after the execution of the king and the queen, the French army was facing the largest enemy in its history, the armies of the First Coalition. The size of the army had to be increased dramatically in just a very, very short time. The key personality behind this project was Lazare Carnot. He was elected as the member of the Committee of Public Safety, and he took over the military affairs, the military matters. He was a great advocate to the levée en masse, which means it is a conscription for all able-bodied men between 18 to 25 years to defend the nation. And just in 1 year, he tripled the size of the army. That needed a lot of arms. Second, there were huge problems with the arsenals, especially the ones, Maubeuge and Charleville, which were close to the western border. They were continuously threatened or occupied by the Allies, which means that their complete capacity was lost for the government. And finally, third, the new method of manufacturing, forcing the interchangeability, actually reduced the capacity, because the gun trading companies turned away from the government, which means that the capacity available for manufacturing guns was much less. So enemy is at the gates of Paris, and Carnot has to develop a new system for manufacturing the guns, which is technically the old system. They revert back to the old system, which in quality is far from the interchangeability, but it delivers guns immediately. What he does is establishing manufacturing centers all around Paris, in all the mansions, all the castles that were took over from the nobles, from the enemies of the Republic, and they start manufacturing guns. Of course the quality is dropping, but who cares about it when you can fire lead balls on the enemy? And that was the most important part for the early years of the Republic. The problem was so severe that at one certain point Carnot considered buying 500,000 lances for the infantrymen. Well, it is not firearm, but you can still pierce the enemy with it. So the start of the First Coalition War actually started the second production period for these carbines. Up until 1800, altogether 6,000 pieces were made. The quality of course suffered, and there are minor differences, like some are mounted in brass, some are mounted in iron, and also there are differences with the barrel lengths, the stock lengths, but all in all they are capable arms. In the 8th year, Bonaparte decided to revert to quality and to reorganize the firearms production. This resulted in the Andev system. The main cause was there were huge problems with firearms quality. The Hussar Musketoon was not included in the Andev firearms family because all what they had in stock seemed to be enough for the cavalry. But the 3rd, 4th and 5th Coalition War emptied these stocks very quickly, and in 1810 it was decided to start over the manufacturing in Maubeuge. This was now the single place where it was manufactured. There are minor differences also, but the most important one is that the front sight was placed on the front barrel band. But all other things are technically the same. The production of the 3rd batch lasted up until 1816, where it was replaced by the 1816 model Hussar carbine. Now, as far as we know, they were not converted to percussion, and today they are very rare to find. Altogether, 11,000 pieces were manufactured in the 3 production periods. Let's talk a bit about tactics. It is a very important question when actually the cavalryman used his firearms, the pistol pair and the carbine or musketoon or whatever. Because the most important arm of the cavalryman is always the cold weapon, which means the saber, the sword, the lance. According to the instructions, there were 2 distinct occasions when the cavalryman had to use his firearms. The first one is when he separated from his unit. In this case, the pistols, they were the last line of defense. These cavalry pistols, smoothbore cavalry pistols, were so inaccurate that they were effective only from point-blank range. So they were the last line of defense. The musketoon, or the carbine, or the longer musketoon, now that could also be used for attacking the enemy. The second occasion when the soldier was sent to skirmish duty. In this case, in front of the closed combat formations, they drew a skirmish line. They were acting in pairs in the skirmish line, and the portion of the soldiers were fighting with firearms and the other portion was fighting with the saber. Now, they were to shoot the enemy in 2 occasions. The first one when they were very close, the second when they were ordered to do so. They always started shooting with the left side pistol, according to the instructions. The instructions also suggested to use the firearms only in single shooting, individual shooting, not in volleys. Riders armed with musketoons could also fight on foot, dismounted. In this case, the unit had to be separated in 2 parts. The first part fired on the enemy, while the other always had his gun loaded. So which means that at least 50% of the soldiers always had a loaded arm for safety. We know that revolutionary armies are usually strong on will, but they are much weaker on training. Let's see how the soldiers were trained. The training for charging and firing the musketoon started dismounted. The recruit learned the proper commands and the proper movements for charging the gun. First, he used dummy cartridges, then blank cartridges, and finally live cartridges. According to the instructions, the musketoon was charged the same way as the infantry musket, but there are minor differences that I will talk to you about later. When he was ordered to charge the firearms, he started with the musketoon, and then he loaded the left pistol and then the right pistol finally. All firearms were carried into battle loaded, with the cock in half cock, and the pen primed and the freezing closed. If you are looking for the complete picture about how to charge and how to fire your carbine or musketoon properly, it is not enough to check the cavalry manuals, because the cavalry manuals are not repeating the parts that are exactly described in the infantry manuals. So which means you have to read both and you have to add the parts from both manuals to get a complete picture. And the instructions that I was using for the infantry are the infantry manuals of 1791, Règlement concernant l'exercice et la manœuvre de infanterie.
The manual I used for the cavalry part was published in 1798-99, and it's titled Instructions concernant l'exercice et les manœuvres de la cavalerie légère.
So after the soldier learned how to properly charge the gun dismounted, there came the mounted training. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a horse here. If you know what this stuff is, then please write it in the comments. This is a very, very useful tool for guys like me. Okay, so the procedure started with haut la carabine order, which means up your carbine. At this moment, with right hand, the soldier grasped the carbine, raised the muzzle, and placed the buttstock on the thigh. So this initiated a sequence of 12 motions to load the carbine. The next order was chargez vos armes, and at this occasion, the carbine was lowered into the left hand. The left hand grabbed the musketoon close to the lock, and the thumb of the right hand pressed on the frizzen. The next command was ouvrir le bassinet, when the right hand thumb opened the frizzen with a strong push, and then moved to the cartridge box, opened the lid to grab one cartridge. The next command was prendre le cartouche. The soldier grabs the cartridge and moved it to the mouth. It was followed by déchirer la cartouche. The soldier bit the tail of the cartridge off. He closed it with 2 fingers and moved it close to the pen. At this position, the right hand is facing the body, the right elbow is resting on the stock, and the cartridge is perpendicular to the frizzen. The next command is amorcer, or prime. The soldier looked down to the pen, poured some powder in the pen, and then moved his hand with the last 2 fingers on the frizzen before closing it. The next one is fermer le bassinet, or close the pen. The soldier with the 2 fingers closed the pen and held the cartridge between the index finger and the thumb closed above the powder column. And now came passer l'arme à gauche. The muzzle is raised, the left hand changes position, holds the musketoon just an inch from the muzzle, and the right hand closes the cartridge to the muzzle. Next one is mettre la cartouche dans le canon. The soldier pours the powder into the bore and then places the cartridge into the muzzle. And now comes tirer la baguette, or pull ramrod. The right hand grabs the ramrod just at the tip with the index finger, the second finger and the thumb, and pulls it, turns it, and inserts the strong end into the muzzle. And now comes bourrer. The right hand reaches the thin end of the ramrod, pushes the cartridge down, and chokes it with 2 strong strokes. It was important, so there is no air gap between the powder and the ball. Then the ramrod is pulled out from the bore, it is turned, and on the order remettez le baguette, it is returned to the ramrod channel under the bore. Now, before starting the shooting procedure, the last command is ferrer le carbine, when the right hand grabs the carbine and prepares for the shooting sequence. Now, before firing, the right thumb was placed on the hammer, the trigger finger under the trigger guard, and the last 3 fingers, they were holding the grip. Now, when the hammer was to be cocked, it was to be done by the thumb of the right hand, but your left hand could also join in. Upon firing, the musketoon was supported by the left hand, but let's not forget that the left hand is still holding the rein, which is always in the left hand of the soldier, and the trigger was pulled with a strong stroke. When it was done, the musketoon was lowered into the left hand again, and with the index finger still on the trigger, the right thumb half-cocked the hammer, and the soldier immediately started the loading procedure. When training inexperienced recruits, the instructor had to check after each and every single shot whether the main charge was set off or not. This was proved by smoke coming out from the touch hole. If there was no smoke coming out from the touch hole, then the musketoon was reprimed and tried to be fired again.
In the previous chapter, I already tried the musketoon to 25 meters with the service charge. Now it is time to check its group at the outer edge of the smoothbore carbine shooting, at 50 meters. I am using the same cartridges, of course.
And this is the 50-meter groups, ladies and gentlemen. And it is, of course, a bit worse than the 25-meter. Let's say the target size, the group size is double than in the case of 25 meters. But 1, 2, 3 shots are still within the size of an 8-ring, which means that you can be in the chest of an enemy from the rest, of course, not from the tactical point of view. But probably it's a head-size target also. I have one flyer here, done here. And you could realize on the other target, the 25-meter target, also that we have a deviation in elevation. And this is caused by the priming of the pen, because you never know exactly how much powder you pour into the pen. It can be 2 grains, 5 grains, 10 grains, anything, which will of course reduce the grass pressure, which will of course reduce the velocity. By the way, let's check the velocity of the bullet. It was very important not only to train the men, but also the horses. The horses had to withstand the large noises of the battlefield. Their training started very early. It was the NCO's duty to fire blank cartridges from pistols at the stable door, until the horses get accustomed to the sound of the gunshot. This was usually done when they returned from a field trip, because usually at that period of time the horses were much more calm. This was repeated up until they completely did not care about that pistol is shot just a few meters from them. When this was achieved, it was time for the mounted shooting. Well, this was a bit harder because the pistol is actually shot very close to the ear of the horse. So first there were time intervals left between the individual shots, and as the horse got calmer and calmer, the frequency between the shots was increased. If there were some horses that were a bit more jumpy than the others and they were not really accustomed to the gunshots, they were separated from the group. They were trained individually. First, they fired pistol shots from a distance, and they step by step closed the gap until they reached the same kind of calm status as the other horses. And when they reached it, they were returned to the group. It was not only the sound of the gunshot that was important to learn for the horses, but also the sound and the view of the flags, the drums, because they were also very frightening for the first time for the novice horses. Let's talk about the ballistics of the Mousqueton. We are not in an easy position because we don't exactly know the muzzle velocity of the projectile fired by this Musketoon. We know that the ball is a 15.9mm round ball, but we don't know the muzzle velocity. But we know the muzzle velocity of the infantry musket, the original muzzle velocity of the infantry musket, because we have some very good sources for that.
One of the key sources was written by Professor Jean-Louis Lombard, teacher of the artillery school at Auxonne. His treatise was written in 1796, and the title is Traité de mouvement de projectile.
Now, this little book stated that the muzzle velocity of the infantry musket was 487 meters per second, with the original service charge of 12.25 grams of musket powder. Now, the only thing we have to do is recreate this muzzle velocity with an original musket, with the original musket ball. Now, this is something that I have already done. I did it actually a few years ago with the infantry musket, and it turned out that with 11 grams of 1.5F Swiss powder, you can reach 470-490 meters per second. There's of course a deviation, because you never really know what kind of choke the paper can generate all around the bullet. Let's not forget that the bullet is significantly smaller than the diameter of the bore, so there is gas blowing out everywhere on the sides of the bore. So you cannot be very, very precise in this question, but this 11 grams of 1.5 Swiss powder generated more or less the same velocity as Lombard professor's velocity. Now, if I add 1 more gram to that 11 gram charge for priming the pen, I arrive to 12 grams of powder, which is very, very close to the original service charge of the French musket, which means that the 1.5F Swiss powder, according to my experience, is a very close equivalent or substitute for the original French musket powder. Now, from this point, it's very easy, because we know that the carbine cartridges and the pistol cartridges held 7.5 grams of the same musket powder as the infantry muskets. So what I was using in my paper cartridges was 7.5 grams of Swiss 1.5F powder. Now, this is the basic charge for my ballistics reproduction. .313 meters per sec. Excellent.
The muzzle energy of the round ball fired with a velocity of 313 meters per second still has enough energy to kill a human at 500 to 600 meters, meaning that at the normal tactical distance there cannot be a problem with lethality. Let's check now what it does to a block of ballistic gelatin. The length of the gelatin block is 40 cm, so we can suppose that at 25 meters the bullet could penetrate at least 2 adult bodies.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning into the Capandball YouTube channel. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, help us grow. If you can and you wish to support us, you can do it through Patreon, patreon.com/capandball. Here you will find exclusive content from me. We are also present on Forgotten Weapons and War platform. That's a beautiful ad-free platform for gun nuts like us with thousands of videos from educational channels. So please visit us there as well. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay cool and keep your powder dry. That was a good spark.